USP Leavenworth, the prison that never closed. And the millions it still consumes. USP Leavenworth in Kansas is America's oldest federal penitentiary still in operation. Opened in the late 19th century, it was designed to embody discipline, permanence, and federal authority. More than a century later, public records, federal budgets, inspector general reports, and news investigations show a different story. An aging, high-security prison that continues to consume tens of millions of taxpayer dollars every year. This documentary examines where that money goes, into staffing, maintenance, healthcare, security upgrades, and emergency repairs, and how history, bureaucracy, and inertia keep one of the nation's oldest prisons alive long past its original design life. The fortress that would not die. They called it permanent. When the United States Penitentiary at Leavenworth opened its gates in 1906, it was supposed to be the final word in federal incarceration. Solid stone. Steel bars. Thick walls quarried and hauled at enormous cost. This wasn't just a prison, it was a statement. A promise that once you entered, the federal government had you, indefinitely, with no intention of letting go cheaply or quietly. More than a century later, that promise still holds. Here's the contradiction no one talks about. USP Leavenworth was built to last forever, and now that forever is costing millions every single year. According to federal budget documents and Bureau of Prisons reporting, maintaining aging, high-security facilities is significantly more expensive than operating modern prisons. Leavenworth, the oldest federal penitentiary still operating, is a prime example. Its thick stone walls don't just hold people in. They hold money inside. And once it started flowing, it never stopped. The hook, a prison older than the system that funds it. Most Americans assume prisons close when they become obsolete. USP Leavenworth didn't. It survived 2 world wars. It survived the Great Depression. It survived massive federal prison expansion, privatization debates, and decades of reform efforts. And today, it still drains public funds, not because it's efficient, but because shutting it down might cost even more. According to government reports and news investigations, the price of maintaining old prisons often rivals, and sometimes exceeds, the cost of building new ones. But when a prison is historic, politically sensitive, and deeply embedded in federal infrastructure, closing it becomes a logistical and financial nightmare. Leavenworth isn't just a prison. It's a sunk cost. A town built around a wall. Leavenworth, Kansas, didn't grow despite the prison. It grew because of it. By the early 1900s, the penitentiary had become one of the largest employers in the region. Guards, administrators, contractors, maintenance crews, entire families depended on the institution's continued operation. Over time, the prison stopped being just a facility. It became an economic anchor. According to historical records, prison labor was even used in the early construction of the facility itself, reducing upfront costs while embedding incarceration directly into its foundation. That pattern, saving money on paper while creating long-term dependence, would repeat itself again and again. By the mid-20th century, USP Leavenworth was no longer just housing inmates. It was sustaining a local economy. Closing it would never be simple. Designed for a different century. USP Leavenworth was designed in an era before modern surveillance, before digital security systems, before contemporary healthcare standards, and before federal labor protections took their current form. Its architecture reflects that. The walls are thick stone, not reinforced concrete. The plumbing snakes through corridors never meant to handle modern capacity. Electrical systems have been upgraded piecemeal over decades, according to government maintenance reports. Every fix creates another problem. Every repair uncovers another weakness. And every weakness costs money. Unlike newer facilities built with modular components, Leavenworth requires custom solutions. You can't just swap parts. You have to rebuild them, often by hand, often under constant security restrictions. That means higher labor costs, longer repair times, and premium contracts. According to federal procurement data, security-cleared contractors working inside active penitentiaries command significantly higher rates than standard construction crews. At Leavenworth, almost every repair qualifies. The high cost of keeping people locked in. Security at USP Leavenworth isn't just about bars and walls. It's about staffing. Federal prisons require 24/7 coverage. Aging facilities require more of it. Old cell blocks weren't designed with modern sightlines or camera coverage. That means more correctional officers per inmate, especially in high-security areas. According to Bureau of Prisons staffing models cited in oversight hearings, older prisons often exceed recommended staffing ratios simply to maintain baseline safety. That staffing doesn't come cheap. Salaries, overtime, hazard pay, pensions. Year after year. And when staffing shortages occur. As reported repeatedly in federal prisons nationwide, overtime costs explode. In some facilities, overtime spending has exceeded millions annually, according to publicly released audits. Leavenworth is not immune. Its aging infrastructure demanding modern manpower. Healthcare, the hidden budget killer. One of the least visible, and most expensive, aspects of prison operations is healthcare. Federal inmates are constitutionally entitled to medical care. That includes aging prisoners, chronically ill inmates, and those requiring specialized treatment. USP Leavenworth houses long-term inmates. Long-term inmates age inside. According to Department of Justice reporting, older inmate populations dramatically increase per capita healthcare costs. Chronic illnesses, mobility issues, mental health services, all must be provided inside a secure environment. Every doctor visit requires escort. Every specialist requires clearance. Every piece of equipment must be secured. Healthcare inside a prison doesn't just cost more. It multiplies. And in an old facility like Leavenworth, retrofitting spaces for modern medical use often requires structural modifications, not just equipment upgrades. Those modifications are slow, complex, and expensive. Why not just shut it down? This is the question taxpayers ask, and the answer is buried in spreadsheets, politics, and logistics. Closing a federal prison isn't as simple as locking the doors. Inmates must be transferred, often across state lines, increasing transportation and security costs. Receiving facilities must have capacity, staffing, and appropriate security levels. Many don't. Staff must be reassigned, laid off, or retired. That triggers union negotiations, severance, pension obligations, and political backlash. And the building itself? It doesn't disappear. According to federal property management rules, decommissioning a historic structure can cost tens of millions of dollars. Environmental remediation, asbestos removal, structural stabilization, all required before a site can be repurposed or sold. In some cases, it's cheaper, at least in the short term, to keep the prison running. And so the money keeps flowing. A system trapped by its own past. USP Leavenworth was built to be permanent. That permanence is now its most expensive feature. Every year it remains open, taxpayers fund a facility that no modern planner would design from scratch. But the system that created it, layered budgets, federal employment structures, legal obligations, and local economic dependence, makes walking away almost impossible. According to experts cited in criminal justice reform reporting, this is how institutional inertia works. Once money starts moving through a system, stopping it becomes more disruptive than continuing it. Leavenworth is no longer just a prison. It's a financial commitment inherited from another century. What comes next? In the next chapter, we'll go inside the numbers. Not the mythology. Not the history books. The budgets. We'll break down how much it actually costs to keep America's oldest federal prison alive, and who benefits from every dollar spent. Because the real story of USP Leavenworth isn't just about who's locked inside. It's about why the door is still open. Following the money. The money doesn't arrive all at once. It never does. It moves quietly, line by line, buried in federal budgets, maintenance requests, overtime authorizations, emergency repair filings, and healthcare expenditures. No single document tells the full story of how much USP Leavenworth costs, because no one wants to see that total in one place. But when you start pulling the records together, a pattern emerges. And it's expensive. The budget nobody reads. Every year, the Federal Bureau of Prisons submits budget justifications to Congress. These documents are public. They're long, technical, and easy to ignore, which is exactly why they matter. According to Bureau of Prisons budget documents and Department of Justice oversight reports, aging high-security facilities consistently rank among the most expensive institutions to operate per inmate. USP Leavenworth falls squarely into that category. Its costs are spread across multiple buckets. Staffing and overtime. Facility maintenance and emergency repairs. Healthcare and mental health services. Security systems and perimeter control. Utilities for an outdated physical plant. Contracts with private vendors. None of these categories sound dramatic on their own. Together, they form a financial gravity well. Staffing, the largest line item. Staffing is the single biggest expense in federal prisons. At USP Leavenworth, it's also one of the most volatile. According to federal staffing models cited in congressional hearings, older prisons require more personnel per inmate than newer facilities. Blind spots. Narrow corridors. Inefficient layouts. Areas that cannot be monitored remotely. Where cameras fail, people are added. Correctional officers. Lieutenants. Supervisors. Medical escorts. Transportation units. And when positions go unfilled, which has been documented repeatedly in Bureau of Prisons Inspector General reports, overtime fills the gap. Overtime is where budgets quietly break. News reports and federal audits have shown that some federal facilities spend millions annually on overtime alone. Officers working double shifts. Triple shifts. Fatigue stacking on top of responsibility. And overtime doesn't just cost time and a half. It accelerates burnout. It increases injury claims. It drives early retirement. Which means more hiring. More training. More money. At Leavenworth, the cycle feeds itself. Maintenance, fixing a prison that was never meant to be fixed. USP Leavenworth was built before modern maintenance standards existed. Its stone walls weren't designed for fiber optics. Its plumbing wasn't designed for modern capacity. Its electrical systems weren't designed for today's security demands. According to government contracting records, maintenance at aging federal facilities is rarely preventive. It's reactive. A pipe bursts. A section of wall deteriorates. An electrical failure triggers a lockdown. Emergency repairs cost more than scheduled upgrades. They always do. And because the prison cannot shut down for repairs, work happens under extreme constraints. Contractors must be cleared. Tools must be logged. Every movement is supervised. That adds hours. That adds personnel. That adds cost. According to federal procurement guidelines, secure site construction projects routinely exceed initial estimates, sometimes by significant margins, due to security requirements alone. At Leavenworth, almost every repair qualifies as secure site work. Utilities, paying to heat history. Stone is durable. It is also inefficient. Heating and cooling a 19th-century prison costs far more than maintaining a modern facility. According to Department of Energy efficiency assessments cited in government reports, older institutional buildings consume significantly more energy per square foot. Leavenworth's thick stone walls absorb heat in summer and leach warmth in winter. Retrofitting for energy efficiency is limited by historical preservation requirements and structural constraints. That means higher utility bills. Year after year. With no easy fix. Electricity doesn't just power lights. It powers locks, cameras, alarms, communication systems, and perimeter defenses. As security technology evolves, demand increases, but the building remains the same. The result is a system constantly pushing against its own limits. And someone has to pay for that tension. Healthcare, where costs multiply. Healthcare spending inside federal prisons has risen steadily, according to Bureau of Prisons healthcare expenditure reports. USP Leavenworth houses long-term inmates, some serving decades-long sentences. Long sentences mean aging populations. Aging populations mean chronic conditions. Diabetes. Heart disease. Mobility issues. Mental health disorders. Every condition requires treatment. Every treatment requires security. A routine medical appointment outside the prison becomes a coordinated operation inside it. Escorts. Restraints. Secured transport. Controlled environments. According to Department of Justice reports, inmate healthcare costs can be several times higher than comparable care in the general population, not because the care is better, but because the environment is more complex. At Leavenworth, medical spaces were not designed for modern care. Retrofitting exam rooms, installing equipment, and meeting updated standards requires ongoing investment. And lawsuits matter here. Court rulings have repeatedly affirmed inmates' rights to adequate medical care. When prisons fail to provide it, the financial consequences escalate: settlements, consent decrees, federally mandated upgrades. Healthcare spending is not optional. It is legally enforced. Private contracts, the quiet beneficiaries. Not all prison spending stays inside government payrolls. A significant portion flows outward, to private companies. According to federal contracting databases, prisons rely on private vendors for food services, medical supplies, facility maintenance, construction and repair, technology and surveillance systems. These contracts are often long-term. Some are automatically renewed. Many are structured to account for security premiums. Private companies working inside prisons charge more, and justify it through risk, compliance, and clearance requirements. Those justifications are legitimate. They are also lucrative. Every year USP Leavenworth remains open, it sustains an ecosystem of contractors whose revenue depends on its continued operation. This isn't corruption. It's structure. And once that structure exists, dismantling it becomes expensive. Security technology, upgrading a cage while keeping it closed. Modern prisons rely heavily on technology. Cameras. Motion sensors. Electronic locking systems. Perimeter detection. USP Leavenworth has had to integrate these systems into a building that predates electricity. According to Oversight reports, integrating modern security into historic facilities often costs more than installing it in new construction. Custom mounts. Reinforced walls. Specialized wiring. And technology ages faster than stone. Cameras become obsolete. Software requires updates. Systems fail. Each upgrade cycle brings new contracts. New installations. New training. And because security cannot be compromised, redundancy is built in, doubling some costs by design. The cost of not choosing. At some point, the question always arises: modernize or close? According to reports from criminal justice policy analysts, indecision is often the most expensive option. Facilities like USP Leavenworth receive partial upgrades. Enough to remain functional, never enough to become efficient. That means Continued high operating costs. No long-term savings. Perpetual, temporary fixes. Leavenworth exists in a state of financial limbo, too important to abandon, too outdated to justify full investment. And so the money keeps flowing. Who really pays? Every dollar spent at USP Leavenworth comes from taxpayers. But the costs are distributed unevenly. Federal budgets absorb the immediate expense. Local economies depend on the payroll. Private contractors rely on the contracts. The system rewards continuity. Shutting it down would disrupt too many financial pathways at once. According to public policy analysts, this is how legacy institutions survive, not because they are efficient, but because they are entangled. The illusion of control. On paper, USP Leavenworth is tightly managed. In reality, it is financially reactive. Money follows emergencies. Emergencies follow decay. Decay follows age. And age is something no budget line can reverse. The prison remains open not because it works well, but because the cost of change is concentrated, while the cost of staying the same is spread out and invisible. Until it isn't. What comes next? In the final chapter, we'll examine the pressure building beneath the surface. Oversight reports. Staffing crises. Policy debates about closures and consolidation. And the question no one wants to answer. What happens when America's oldest federal prison finally becomes too expensive to ignore? The price of never closing. For more than a century, USP Leavenworth has survived every attempt to rethink it. Not because it was efficient. Not because it was modern. But because every alternative came with a bill no one wanted to pay all at once. By the time federal officials seriously discuss closing a prison, the decision is no longer about justice or safety. It's about damage control. And at Leavenworth, that damage has been compounding for decades. Warnings in plain sight. Inspector General reports don't read like thrillers. They are dry. Technical. Measured. But when you read them closely, the language tells a story of concern that grows sharper over time. According to multiple Department of Justice Office of the Inspector General reports, the Bureau of Prisons has repeatedly struggled with aging infrastructure, staffing shortages, rising healthcare costs, and deferred maintenance across its system. Facilities built in the early 20th century are cited as particularly vulnerable. USP Leavenworth fits every risk profile. Old buildings. High security. Long-term inmates. Complex maintenance needs. None of this is sudden. None of it is secret. And yet, year after year, the solution has been the same: keep paying. Deferred decisions become emergencies. There is a concept in public finance called deferred maintenance debt. It's what happens when you postpone repairs not because you don't know they're needed, but because addressing them fully would force a larger reckoning. At Leavenworth, deferred maintenance isn't theoretical. According to federal facility condition assessments referenced in oversight discussions, aging prisons accumulate backlogs of repairs that grow faster than annual maintenance budgets can address. Roofs are patched instead of replaced. Systems are upgraded in sections instead of comprehensively. Every partial fix buys time. It also increases future costs. Eventually, what could have been a planned renovation becomes an emergency failure. And emergencies, inside prisons, are expensive by definition. Lockdowns. Security disruptions. Staff overtime. Emergency contracting. The longer a decision is delayed, the more expensive the outcome becomes. The staffing cliff. One of the most dangerous pressure points isn't structural. It's human. According to Bureau of Prisons workforce data cited in congressional testimony and media reporting, staffing shortages have become a systemic problem across federal prisons. Recruitment struggles, retirements, and burnout have collided. Older facilities are hit hardest. They demand more officers per inmate. They require more manual oversight. They increase physical strain. At Leavenworth, officers aren't just supervising people. They're compensating for a building that can't do the work modern facilities were designed to handle. When staffing levels drop, overtime spikes. When overtime spikes, burnout accelerates. When burnout accelerates, resignations follow. This isn't a crisis that explodes overnight. It erodes. Quietly. Until something breaks. Healthcare and the clock that never stops. Time is the most expensive factor inside USP Leavenworth. Inmates age in place. According to publicly available Bureau of Prisons demographic data, the federal inmate population has grown older over the last 2 decades. Longer sentences mean higher long-term medical costs. At Leavenworth, this trend is amplified. Healthcare costs rise not just because patients age, but because delivering care inside an aging, secure facility multiplies complexity. According to DOJ reporting, transporting inmates for specialized care requires coordination, staffing, and security measures that add layers of expense. Delaying care isn't an option. Courts have been clear, constitutionally adequate healthcare is mandatory. Failure leads to litigation. Litigation leads to settlements. Settlements lead to mandated spending. Healthcare doesn't wait for budget cycles. It demands payment on its own timeline. The politics of closure. Closing a federal prison is never just an administrative act. It's political. Local economies rely on prison jobs. Unions protect their members. Federal agencies fear disruption. According to reporting on past prison closures and consolidations, proposals often face resistance from lawmakers whose districts depend on correctional facilities for employment and federal funding. USP Leavenworth sits at the intersection of history and economics. It is symbolic. It is entrenched. It is costly. Shutting it down would require relocating inmates, redistributing staff, and absorbing short-term costs that would spike budgets before any long-term savings appear. In politics, long-term savings rarely win over immediate pain. So the prison stays open. When history becomes a liability. USP Leavenworth is often described as historic. That word carries weight and cost. Historic structures face additional constraints. Preservation requirements can limit renovation options. Structural changes may require approvals that slow projects and inflate costs. According to federal property management rules, historic designation complicates modernization. You can't always tear out what no longer works. Sometimes, you have to preserve it, even when it's inefficient. History, in this case, isn't free. It charges interest. The illusion of stability. From the outside, USP Leavenworth appears stable. The walls stand. The gates operate. The system functions. But stability can be misleading. According to public policy analysts, institutions that appear stable while absorbing rising costs often mask fragility beneath the surface. Budgets stretch. Staff compensate. Temporary fixes accumulate. Until they don't. At some point, the numbers force a decision. Not because of outrage. Not because of scandal. But because math stops cooperating. The real cost of doing nothing. Doing nothing is never neutral. At USP Leavenworth, doing nothing has meant spending tens of millions of dollars annually to preserve a structure built for another era. Every year the prison remains open. Maintenance backlogs grow. Healthcare costs rise. Staffing pressures intensify. Emergency spending becomes more likely. According to experts cited in criminal justice finance reporting, this is how systems collapse, not dramatically, but financially. They become too expensive to sustain quietly. What happens when the bill comes due? No prison lasts forever. Even ones built to pretend they will. When USP Leavenworth eventually faces closure, the cost won't disappear. It will concentrate. Decommissioning. Environmental remediation. Staff transitions. Inmate relocation. The bill will be large. The only question is whether it will be planned, or forced by crisis. The final accounting. USP Leavenworth was designed to be permanent. Its walls reflect that ambition. But permanence is not the same as sustainability. For more than a century, America has paid to keep this prison standing, not because it represents the future of incarceration, but because confronting its past has always seemed more expensive. Until now. Because every year the prison remains open, the choice not to choose becomes another line item. Another contract. Another repair. Another overtime shift. Another reminder that in the world of incarceration, the most dangerous thing isn't chaos. It's inertia. USP Leavenworth doesn't just imprison people. It imprisons money. Locked behind stone walls built in the 1800s, taxpayer dollars circulate endlessly, maintaining a system that survives not because it works well, but because dismantling it would finally force the truth into the open. And when that day comes, the question won't be whether America can afford to close its oldest federal prison. It will be whether it could afford not to. USP Leavenworth was built to be permanent. Not efficient. Not flexible. Permanent. For more than a century, it has stood behind stone walls and steel bars, holding not just people, but public money. Every repair, every overtime shift, every emergency upgrade is another reminder that systems designed to last forever eventually demand a price no one planned for. There are no villains hiding in the shadows here. No single decision that broke the system. Just decades of choices made easier by delay, paid for by taxpayers who rarely see the bill. Prisons like Leavenworth don't survive because they work well. They survive because shutting them down forces uncomfortable math, political risk, and financial reckoning all at once. And until that reckoning comes, the money keeps flowing. If you want to understand how power, policy, and profit shape the justice system, follow the money, because that's where the truth usually is. This has been Finance in Crime.